Thank you all for coming to our virtual book launch party and discussion. It means a lot to me to have all of your support and, excited to share more about kind of like the background details about the book. And this will be emceed by the wonderful Kerri Cook, my sister-in-law, who also the chose the subtitle of the book. And I'm very grateful for that, and also very grateful for everything Kerri has done to help support me on my book journey.
Oh, thanks, Kat.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you want me to take over?
I would like you to take over. Yes, thank
Okay. Well, thank you so
you.
much for inviting me today to do your interview for your virtual book launch. I'm excited to be here with you, and I really appreciate it and feel like it's a great honor to be the one getting to ask you some questions today. And let me just get started by saying how amazing you are and telling you how proud we all are of you for achieving this goal and sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you, Kerri.
What a wild ride it has been that we're going to hear about. So let's get into it. Starting off with the book, can you give us just a little insight into what inspired you to write Designing Success and what message you're hoping your readers will take away?
Yeah, so the initial, well, as you know, I've always wanted to write a book starting back in high school when I was writing down everything my mom said, the things my mother told me, concept. And then later it became I wanted to write a book about my yearbook and what I learned from building that. And it's been on my Google tasks list since like 2010. Um, so when I was left the meet group, it just seemed like the perfect time to actually write the book. But the actual topic of the book came when my one of my best friends, Alyssa, called me, and she was having a lot of trouble at her work. And this has been kind of like an ongoing theme that I've noticed, like with me and my friends, of just like huge stress at work, and it makes the rest of your life it makes you feel like you're not stacking up in the rest of your life. So because she was so stressed at work, she felt like, she wasn't being a good enough mom to her two kids. She felt like she wasn't taking care of her body enough. She felt like she was too snappy in general, and she just wasn't feeling good. And so, and I've seen that with, throughout my career, like that's just what happens when you're overstressed. And so as I was thinking about the things I've learned from building the company, building my yearbook, and into the meet group, I've learned a lot about how to kind of manage that kind of side of things of balancing your life with your career goals and your work. And so that's one of the things I wanted to kind of write to, like, how can you set those boundaries? How can you make decision making more efficient? Because being starting my yearbook as a high school student and then being a college student as it grew, and then later going through everything of your 20s and then Wharton and all of that, I really learned that there is you need to be very intentional about your environment and how you shape yourself up for success, because it's never going to be about willpower or just working harder. It's about trying to find environments that will actually allow you to do better. And one of those environments that also allows you to do better, of course, is having amazing supportive people in your corner. And that's what has marked my journey for sure. But that's really what I wanted to capture when I was writing the book. And even the way my publisher does is that they have you in the very beginning just kind of write that, and that kind of parts of it become your introduction. And throughout writing my book, I really was writing it specifically with Alyssa in mind. Like these are things, like these are conversations I've had with her. These are conversations I feel like I could have with all of my friends. Like, this is how we're thinking about it. And even though, like, yeah, I obviously wrote the book because, like, I did all this research and all that stuff. Obviously everything I'm working on is in my own life too. Like, how can I, put the things that I wrote about in practice? Even, and so I was also kind of writing it to myself as well.
I think that really comes through. It does feel like when you're reading it that you're talking to me. I can hear your voice and it feels like you're talking to a friend, or like, to me, it does feel very much in your voice and like it's a conversation. How long did the whole process take? What was it like? Like, how start to finish? I knew you were doing it, but at the same time, you have kids and I have kids and life is happening. And how long did this whole thing take?
A little over a year. So I started working with manuscripts in October 2023. But I guess actually, so in the summer of 23, I actually wrote a different book. So I had already written a book kind of going into what I did with my publisher here. So I already knew I could write a book. And then once I had that initial book down, and that the first book took like 60 days. It was about 35,000 words, and it was like crap. So I knew that that wasn't something I was going to want to publish. And I was like, okay, well, I really want to write a real book, something I could be proud of and actually have out there. So that's when I contacted, um, manuscripts and worked with them. And so the first thing that they have you do is like a positioning thing. So the first 4 weeks or so, it's just like figuring out, hashing out what the book's about, your table of contents, what each chapter you want to do. And then after that, it's really like I wrote the initial first draft of this book in about 16 weeks, um, which is not that bad. Like, it's about 45,000 words. Well, and then there's the citations, of which there's about 4,000 words of citations. But those came later. That came in like the last week of revisions. So I was trying to get those finished. And then after you write the manuscript, then after that, there's a little bit of a break. I took about a month break from looking at the book every day, and then started the revisions process. In that month, I had a structural editor review everything, and they had, feedback that was, coming in cold, like someone who didn't know me at all, that didn't know the book throughout the first journey. So I had that feedback coming in, and then I jumped into revisions. And for that, I had worked with an editor each week. And you basically rewrite the book in the revisions process, which, you know, is good and bad. Like good because like, oh, you want it to make it the best it can be, but then also bad because it's like, oh, it's harder, I would say, to, kill your darlings and to get, to do that editing part. I definitely find the getting words on paper part much easier of the process.
What do you think? What was the hardest chapter to write? And like, why do you think it was the hardest? Which one?
I think chapter 13, which is Thriving Together, was the hardest to write. So that one is about, I share some of the comments from, high school, like people, you know, being meaner to me than they were to Dave, for instance, as we were coming up with the company. And, you know, I mentioned, some of the challenges that are specifically about being a female entrepreneur in that chapter. And I also bring in other movements, so like DEI and dream maternity. And it was just so hard. It was hard to, I guess, um, get the tone of that chapter right, because obviously I am coming from such a privileged place to have had all these experiences in general, but at the same time, the comments that I had growing up, like the and like kind of like the low-key bullying, uh, did exist. And even when after publishing the book, I did get a Facebook comment from someone I went to high school with saying, I heard Dave did it all, or something along those lines. And it was like, oh, did they read my book and are they tongue-in-cheek commenting? And it's like, no, no, they weren't. That was just a reminder. It was like, oh, right, that was, and it actually was a little validating. It's like, oh, right, there were complete jerks, and there are always going to be complete jerks, of course. And like looking past that, but I think so. It was just harder because the chapter 13 is a little bit more vulnerable, and it's also a little bit more like, there isn't a great answer how we can get through those aspects when there are, systemic issues that are keeping different groups from being able to, design their careers in the way that they would necessarily want. And so that I think was a bit more painful. The other issue with that one was I had to change an interview at like the 11th hour in that one. And so it was also just the last one I finished because I was like, oh, I need to, I inserted a new bunch of quotes in there and then like kind of the last minute. But I think it made it a lot stronger. And I appreciate your help on that because that one was finished while I was in Lake George with you.
Yeah. And I mean, just like, thank you for like sharing those stories. Obviously, I mean, I was there, but being, 10 years older than you and not really, on a daily basis, hearing the bullying that was going on, but like just being vaguely aware of it as being part of the family. Like I didn't know that whole story. really. And not I like learning it at the same time as my teenage daughters learning it, right? Just in family discussions, like at the dinner table. It's important. It's important and valuable that you're telling those stories. Before we get a little deeper into your own personal journey, I noticed that you weave strategies into each chapter. If your readers could only remember one lesson from the book, which one would you want it to be?
I'd want it to be, that the idea that you could create your own luck by having good connections and being kind to others and being, kind of putting yourself out there. So I really think that that's your biggest opportunity because no matter what you do, no matter how you set up the rest of your life, you're always going to hit roadblocks. There's always going to be things you don't expect and things that you couldn't have planned for. And I think being able to have those support systems in place so that you could reach out to other people it is going to be the greatest source of luck that you could possibly ask for in your career and the rest of your life.
That's great. Pivot and keep moving.
Mhm.
Now, to get into a little bit more about you, you started your first company as a teenager. I happen to be there for those days working with you and your brothers. But for those with us today who are not there, how did that early experience shape the way you approach your success today, 20 years down the road?
So I think that, with how we built the company, that was a lot for high school students. And I think that, um, I just had to learn how to do like things I wanted to do in my personal life while still having to, perform at a pretty high level for work, at the same time. And it just became like almost like second nature of just being able to like, okay, well, these are the things I need to focus on. These are the things I need to prioritize. Because, for instance, when we were building my yearbook, I was realizing that I was definitely overstretching myself when it came to school at different times. Like obviously I was a good student. I cared about being a good student. But I definitely overdid it. So like at one point I was taking, I think I took 5 AP courses my senior year of high school. It was something stupid. Because I could have easily taken, like a normal class and had a much better time. Um, and that's when I first started realizing kind of the health impacts of some of the work that is and some of the stress that you could be under. And so I kind of had that lesson early on. It's like, oh no, 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 you need to slow down when your body is telling you to slow down. And that first time I really realized it was the first CNBC interview was right after we did our Series A. Um, and I just got so sick coming home at 104-degree fever. Didn't know that until after I attempted to take a calculus exam. That didn't go well. And when and that's like when I first realized that there was nothing actually wrong with me. Like I did go to the doctor. And I don't think I even had anything. I was like better like after like the day. And then I got another 104-degree fever the next time I was on CNBC. So that was like when I started to realize like, oh, this is like, it does take a toll to be doing this, that type of higher stress work and being like, nervous and all of those things. And so, as I built the rest of my career, I started to put things in, as Jeff would say, the scheme of things and keep in mind like the rest of the perspective, like, okay, well, that's not what is mattering here. Um, like, there's always going to be stressful days at work and stressful things you have to handle. But then what you need to focus on is health and family and the things that, you always need around you. And so that I think was kind of an early lesson of just like how to balance it. Cause I feel like, most people, they don't have like that taste of like that type of like work stress until much later. And so they're handling it when they're also handling kind of more significant other significant stressors, like maybe they're starting a family or maybe they're like dating and stuff. I got to, experience that a little bit younger and figure out how it worked for me to kind of get through it.
Yeah. With that, like what role do you think those setbacks played? Um, I mean, whether it was a setback and stress or something else, like in your journey, like, do you have an experience that you can share with us on like how you recommend people view the failures along the way.
Yeah. So I would say, if you're not making mistakes, then you're not making decisions. So there's always going to be failures and you should kind of expect them to happen. Um, and I think that in just how I like my outlook, I think has always been um looking for the positive side of even it's like, okay, this is bad, but it's not all bad. This part's okay. And kind of finding those little pieces that make sense to pivot from. So like, um growing the company, sometimes there were features that just like fell completely flat. And so being able to say, okay, this isn't working, but why isn't it working? I think that was kind of an important lesson, just like just in the resilience of building that isn't always available for like just like, it was just something that was became second nature. It's like it was kind of like an assumed thing. It's like, okay, this product probably won't work, but you have to be relentlessly optimistic that it might. And so it just always like building something, kind of expecting it to fail and then being pleasantly delighted, delighted if it doesn't. But if it does fail, figuring out how you can tinker it. And I think that, from the very beginning, we were learning that, everything was iterative. And I think that applies to the rest of your career journey too. Is like there's always iterations, everything's an experiment. Even the things that seem to be working now might not work, a few seasons from now. Like some of our most popular features, like battles, eventually stopped mattering. And then we had to kill them. So, it's a matter of just like figuring out where to iterate. And realize that in any failure, it's just an opportunity to learn something. And rather than judging success by, maybe some type of high metric or hitting some number, it's more about judging success by the opportunities and the shots on goal that you've been able to take.
I like that. I like that. And I like the relentless optimism. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the actual writing process. Um, if you could share a little like behind the scenes peek into like what your process was like. What was like the most surprising thing you learned while writing the book?
Yeah. So my writing process. So generally I did almost all of my writing, well, at night. So after the kids went to bed, so I was writing at night. Sometimes I would write in the day during Cadence's naps, but those were a little bit less. I was actually surprised. I would have expected the nap time to be good because like I'm generally more of a morning person than a night person. But I think the nighttime writing actually had things flowing better. Um, so my process, I always put on uh, a album by Alan Gogol, which is like instrumental music with fun names like Cinnamon Squirrel and things like that. It's just cute music. Um, and that became kind of my writing music. So every time I would write, I'd turn on the music and kind of like get me in that zone. And while I was writing, it made the most sense for me to well, never edit as I write. Like I'd fix maybe a typo if I typed like the wrong word or something. But other than that, like I wasn't like writing a paragraph, rereading the paragraph, editing it. I was just getting it all out on paper. And I found that was incredibly important because for me, I can have some perfectionisty tendencies and to go back and just and to be, to actually finish the first draft of it, knowing that I'd be editing it later, it was easier just to like get it all out there and and um have that be done. My goal, I think every week was roughly 2,500 to 3,000 words. So when I was checking with my developmental editor, that was, where I wanted to be. Usually I would try to be within the same chapter, or rather complete like roughly a chapter a week. And if I was within the same chapter, like I'd try to like set up the next section of it so that it would be a little easier to get started on the next one. Um, and when I was writing, I tried not to look up anything because that's just another distraction. So what I would do a lot of times, I would write, like in my thing, I'd put in brackets like insert interview here, interview that I haven't done yet, but insert interview here, and then later on something like highlight something, be like see if these are in any way correct. Because like sometimes it'd be like, okay, I think that there's research that supports this. I don't remember what it is right now, but I'm not going to look it up right now. I'm just going to put that there and insert research later. And that was kind of the my process. So I did most of the research actually while Cadence was napping. I actually did a fair amount of writing and out or fair amount of outlining and just thinking through the chapters, just talking out loud in a notes app while like playing with her. So she had a lot of she was exposed to my book a lot as a young child.
You're trying to get it all sunk into her head, her baby head,
Right.
all the
I,
advice.
right. I'd be like, Cadence, how does this sound? And she'd be like, "Nah."
I think that's great. Were there any chapters that almost didn't make the cut? And before you answer that, I just had a thought, even like the flash, what you just said about brain dumping all of the information, down and not editing even comes into play. Last night, I was helping my 10-year-old with his homework, and he had 3 bullet points, and he was trying to edit them as he went along. And I said, no, just write 6 ideas and then go back. So your advice even comes into play for fourth grade homework. Were there any chapters that you had written, or chapters that did make it in that almost didn't make the cut?
Chapter 3, Fat or Rad, almost didn't make the cut. That was like
Why?
it was so it is very AI-y. Like it goes into AI. And I was like, oh, does it go too much into AI? Like talking about like that being, a trend and wanting to be that is something I think is important. That is something that's timely, but that was, also some feedback from a beta reader is like, not feeling that topic. But then I kept basically I heard polarizing things on it. I decided to keep it in, but I'm still like, and I like the chapter, like personally, I like it. But I am curious, like how other people feel about chapter 3. Because like my beta readers were split. And also, but then in one of my Amazon reviews, that is a chapter that specifically called out as helpful. So I was like, yes. So that was like, yay, that's good. But yeah, so chapter 3 almost didn't make the cut. And part of it was it needed, that was actually one where my mom came really helpful because my mom obviously is not um that techie in by any stretch. But she's obviously familiar with AI and all that. And so when she was reading that chapter, I asked her, like, I thinking of deleting this one completely. And she was like, she's like, I just delete these parts. And she showed basically she suggested like key edits that would help like improve the pacing. And that helped a lot. Cause even though like I liked my editor for my publisher going through, I felt like he didn't really make those same types of make those same types of edits. Whereas like where she was like, oh no, she's like, this is where you're losing me here. And that was incredibly helpful because I think that, my editor for manuscripts, like I think he really liked that chapter. So I think he was just unwilling to make larger edits to it. And he was like, no, this seems fine. But I do think that those edits really, really helped it. And that's what made it make the cut at the very like end of it. I kind of wanted to cut the whole book, and that's when they say that means you're done. That means just to get it out there when it's just like, no, rewrite everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Were
then
the
also chapter 1, which is just defining success, and then chapter 5, find your North Star. At one point I was trying to combine them because they have very similar ideas. And then the Frankenstein like chapter that one became was just too messy, and it didn't really make sense to put that one first, but it also didn't really make sense to put it in the middle. So that's why that one was kept separate, but that was another hard one to kind of put together.
were there any strategies you used yourself to stay kind of focused and motivated while juggling all of your writing and editing with like your other responsibilities and life in general?
Yeah, so one of my strategies, I talk about this a bit in like the creating time chapter of like I'm huge with like bundling things. So like if I was, I would try to like read the chapters or listen to the chapters while I was like on the treadmill or something like that. So I like try to like be in different places working on it so that I could work in that kind of those micro sessions. And I found those micro sessions to be super helpful. So anytime, any kind of thing way I could like break up the work a little bit was incredibly helpful. So um, when I was, for instance, like picking up my son, like the line to, the line at school, I'd like make sure not because I feel like a lot of times when I'm like alone in my car or something, I feel the need to consume, like whether it's listening to a podcast or listening to an audiobook or something, like I feel the need to always be consuming. But kind of leaving that time is just like time to think through what I wanted to do in like the next chapter, or oh, I just had a thought about this edit. Um, that was like useful time of just like for just reserving it for thinking. So that was one of the strategies, was just like making sure that there was like blank space in my day just to think was important to me, and definitely was, how I was able to help me stay motivated to get it done, because it's tiring writing a book. And then of course the thing that was especially helpful with how manuscripts is built, so not only do you have your you're writing the book, but then you also have your author community. And so Pia and Victor here are, fellow authors in the program. And so we kind of all bonded working through it together. So we had things that we were talking to each other about. I think that just that camaraderie and that ability to share it with others really helped us be able to, find ways of, getting it to the finish line.
What advice would you give to someone who's thinking about or dreaming of maybe starting to write a book of their own?
Don't do it. No, I'm just kidding. No, just start writing. It's, I think that, you can't be um too stuck on like what to even like write about. Like for me, it was helpful to have like a general like table of contents, meaning like literally just like names of chapters, but those all changed and stuff. Um, but that's kind of all you need to just get started, just getting words out there. I think that, any book, so much of it changes from what you first wrote to what the finished book is, that it just makes sense to just like put it all out there and then see how it is. But then also, if you are writing a book, find, find your group to get you to the finish line, because I can't stress enough how helpful it was to have Pia and Victor and Stacy and like everyone else like kind of in that our author cohort to lean on, and to have the support of just knowing that they're going through the same thing, writing the same going through the same challenges with writing and editing and all of that. And so finding your community, I think, is key to actually getting it out. But yeah, just start writing. It's
Did you
not
ever
that many words,
feel,
really.
yeah, just get the words out.
Yeah.
Did you ever feel vulnerable sharing your own personal stories, like in the book, or, like it's your brothers and you, and it's like the story of how things were happening? Did you ever, did that vulnerability, did that ever bother you or bubble up, or
Yeah. So
how did
most
you
of the
navigate
stories,
that?
yeah. Yeah. So I think that there is, is a certain vulnerability, especially with like talking about kind of the harder parts, like, the teasing in high school, or like even just like admitting that I literally had never asked Jeff when he needed something by. And so when Jade asked me when she needed something by, being like, why have I never thought of asking for priorities before? Because I'm like, that's embarrassing. So things like that, I was like, oh, having that out there is a little different. But I like I obviously everything that I wrote, I thought a lot about what to put in there. And I was comfortable with it. But I will say there was one story that I cut because I realized on second reading that it's like it wasn't about me, but anyone that knew the company at the time probably could figure out who it was about. And um, I didn't think she would want that story in a book. So I was like, oh wait, let me remove that. Um, and I was also very mindful for the interviews, especially or when talking to friends, not to use real names in most of the cases. So like Alyssa, for instance, her name isn't actually Alyssa. And um, and there was actually a lot of those where, you know, I wanted to be very cognizant that like I'm comfortable sharing my story, but especially when I was bringing in other people's examples, I wanted to make sure that even if they were comfortable telling me the story itself, that it was anonymized in a way that they were comfortable with going into it. Because, people don't want to, especially when like there's a few stories of people having negative experiences at their work, and they don't necessarily want those out there. And so I made sure to anonymize those as much as I could, because it's my book. I don't want to make anyone else uncomfortable with things that they might not have wanted to share. And that's also why I sent you all of your excerpts beforehand, making sure you were comfortable.
Yes, we read it. You mentioned a lot of like revisions you mentioned earlier is like killing your darlings. What were some of your darlings that didn't make it? Can you share any of them?
Yeah, so there's like an additional 1,000 words on the history of the work week that I removed from the Workplace Revolution chapter. Like there was a lot. I could talk about Semco, which has like this retire a little program. I talked about 4-day work weeks in other countries more. Um, I talked a lot more about Kellogg's 6-day work week, a 6-hour work week. Like there's a yes, Melissa, definitely next book. I could like it was I thought it was very interesting.
That's what I was going to
And
say. Maybe we already have our next topic.
it was I thought
Sounds
it
like a
was
lot of the
fascinating.
research is done.
But it was maybe a little bit distracting from the general point of the chapter. And that's like one of my beta readers, which Melissa, thank you to. She was one of my beta readers. But another one of my beta readers, Meredith specifically called out, she's like, please, no, this is too much. Like, why am I reading your research paper about the work week right now? I was like, okay, that's fair. I will, yeah, it's like okay, it could be also be a good topic for Substack. I did actually save all of my like it's called my Hospital for Darlings doc. So anything I deleted from the book, I have a document of it. So it can still be used in other ways. But that was definitely one of like the darlings. Like I found it super interesting. It definitely did not work with the pacing of the book. In fact, when I originally wrote it, I basically presented all of this research and then said, you might be wondering why I shared all of that. And my editor was like, yeah, I was. Why did you do that? So there's definitely one of the things that kept coming up. It was like, and then I tried to integrate it more, and then it's just still didn't work. So anyway, that was one of them. Another one was all my Harry Potter references, which I realized I misspoke. So recently at a holiday party, someone asked me how many times asked me a similar question. I was like, oh, I removed all my Harry Potter references. I didn't. I actually still reference Harry Potter once, but it's through Mike Schubert's Potterless podcast about Harry Potter. So not it directly, but I did originally have 2 or 3 Harry Potter stories in there as examples. And I removed those for a few reasons. One is some of J.K. Rowling's personal abuse, but then for other reasons, I was a little bit afraid of quoting fiction's actually kind of dicey, and I was a little bit afraid of being sued. So that's another
Um,
aspect.
but I do like that you still portrayed the fact that you are a Harry Potter fan.
Oh yeah, yeah. I had to still have that in there in some way.
Yeah,
And there
you
used
worked
to
it
also
in.
be an additional Sex in the City
You
thing.
successfully worked that in too. I did
Yes.
see that.
Mhm. And The Office is in there too. Um,
You're funny.
and the Office Ladies podcast is in there. So,
Oh yeah,
and then of course
yeah.
running. So I did try to bring in my interests, but I tried to limit them to not be overbearing. The original Harry Potter stuff might have been a little overbearing because it wasn't like the commonly quoted things. It was like, you're like a
I
deep cut
think
Harry
that's what
Potter fan
happens
stuff.
when you listen to the Harry Potter Audible books a million times.
Yeah, I mean, I listen to them every year, multiple times a year. Is that not normal?
It's totally normal.
Thank you.
What do you hope readers will do differently after reading your book?
So I hope that they'll be more intentional about their life. I think that most people are, you know, kind of on that treadmill of their career where they just like will just take the next thing and say, "Oh, yes, I'm going to do that too," and just keep adding things. Um, so I hope that the book helps them take that pause to figure out what they actually want to be doing, how they want to set boundaries in their life, how they want to even be intentional about like what they want their life to look like rather than just kind of accepting what their life currently is. And so I think that that's kind of what I want readers to do is really just to be intentional about thinking about how they're setting up their how they're setting up their careers and the rest of their life that is influenced by their careers.
Is there a part of the book that you're most excited for people to read? Like that you just can't wait for them to get to when you know someone is reading it?
You know, all of it. I do think I like my road like so I like all of my chapters, of course, but that's why they made the cut. I do think that my favorite parts of the book are chapters 2 and 3 because or parts 2 and 3 because I feel like the first two chapters is kind of like the setup, which are fine and it's good and it's necessary to kind of get this my yearbook story in there. But I'm most excited about the later chapters, especially I think part 3, where you have roadblocks, dealing with imposter syndrome, and in that thriving together chapter of just like things that I think are more looking out into the future rather than in how you want to kind of use the tools from the book to hopefully not just help yourself in your career, but also your team and be a leader there.
Are there certain parts of the book that you've heard the most feedback about? Like what's resonating with the readers the most?
Yeah, so I've heard a number of so the fat or rad was specifically called out. The setting boundaries chapter for sure, the imposter syndrome chapter for sure. Really, it's been kind of all over, and I think that that's good that different chapters have spoken to different people in different ways. But my favorite piece of feedback, so one of my friends, her 12-year-old daughter read the book, was reading the book and it was really enjoying it. But she came to and her mom also read the book but being an adult and like clock it the same way, her daughter came across the word porn does appear in the book as is the word phallic, and she looked it up, didn't know what porn was, decided to look up the word, and that hilarity ensued. So like I'm just like, luckily her parents, were like, oh my God, okay, this is but it was a funny story because like, obviously writing the book, it wasn't for audience in mind, but obviously there's nothing graphic in the book. But then, of course, if you Google the word porn, that's not a great idea. Don't do that. And but the so I think that was kind of a funny feedback. It was like, oh, I didn't even realize that was like I forgot that was even mentioned, but it was mentioned within how AI moderation has improved so much when it comes to nudity. But so that was kind of the funniest piece of feedback I got was just like that kind of that background story. And then what I specifically loved about her reading this book though is so she showed me her book. She took ample notes. She has like um those like sticky highlighter things on so many pages, and that just was just so cool to see how much she loved the book. But what really stood out to her, and what I loved about was like she liked that I identify as a nerd, and that I think that that's cool. Because her mom told me, and then she showed the story as well. Like, her mom had called her a nerd, and she took it as like an insult, rather than as like, oh no, it's good to be smart. It's good to be a bit nerdy. And so she loved that I, kind of owned being a nerd and owned like that aspect of my personality and how, it's cool. Right,
Yeah,
Kerri?
and
Cool to
that's
be a
very
nerd.
authentic. You've always put a positive spin on that, and my kids feel the same way. Now, I think because of your example. What's the best way for readers to like continue to connect with your message, like once they're done with the book?
Yeah, so definitely my website, cconnelly.me. And there's some exercises and journal there. I'm also doing, some other things some different products I'll be rolling out. So like one of them starts Monday. It's a 14-day email challenge of just like kind of going through some of the concepts from the book. Um, So that's one of the things that, if you're interested in it, shoot me a message. I can add you to the list and send you that. But, you know, I'm just looking for ways to just continue to stay involved with, how I can have you, kind of interact with the material in the book. And also I do office hours and coffee chats every month. So this month is January 24th at 1:30. We're doing the topic's going to be about motivation and staying motivated, which I thought would be fun for the new year. Um, because that's obviously a time when a lot of people make a lot of different changes, and so the theme for January is motivation. Other ones might be like going to market with marketing. So there's a range of ones, but definitely check that out. There's a office hours tab on my website for when the next one is.
In the book, you mentioned that you're faced with the what's next question, but I'll ask it again. What do you think is next for you? And maybe we already have that as your next topic for your next book. But what do you think is next for you
I could
after
definitely see
now
writing
that
another
time
book
is
because
done?
that was fun. But yeah, I just hope to get into, do more speaking, do more consulting, do a little bit of coaching, and of course, find ways of just kind of getting the message out there. So, and kind of leaning into what I made with the book and starting to get the message out there in real ways. As you know, I've been doing lots of speaking opportunities since I was like in high school, and I've always really enjoyed those. And so I hope to do, more of those and just, keep getting the message out there.
Do you have any future conversations or projects that you're excited about right now?
Um, the main one was kind of like the products around the book and just being able to package it in different ways. So like I'm excited about the email challenge and trying out that. And yeah, so that's kind of a fun project I'm working on.
And just like in my last item is if there's one actionable step that we can take away right after this event to start designing our own success, what would you recommend that step be?
So I think that so that first step is to start, it's kind of like to block out the noise and really think about intentionally what you want it to look like in 10 years from now. Because I think that that's kind of where it all stems from, is actually, taking that pause and realizing, where you want it to go. There's a quote, you waste years by not being willing to waste hours, or something like that. And basically be able to take that intentional pause and start defining what success looks like to you, as like the first step before you do the rest. And then, as a second step after that, then I start, connecting with others to see where they are on their journeys and how they define success and how you want to, and how there might be opportunities to help each other or support each other. Because I think that, that collaborative aspect to it will make you both stronger, kind of building the life you want.
That's awesome, Catherine. That's all the questions I have for you for today. Um, Before you wrap or take some questions, if there's any questions from the chat or anybody else, I just wanted to say thank you again for inviting me to do the interview with you today. We've never done an interview together. It was fun.
Thank you. If I do another one, I may ask you again. I will definitely ask you again. I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thanks, Kat.
Thank you. And yeah, any questions from you all? Thank you again so much for supporting the book. I do want to also plug Pia and Victor's books. Again, Pia's is Welcome to the Creative Club, and Victor's is Chasing Credibility. So check them out. They're both great. Oh, thank you, Melissa. Let's wait for another moment. If anyone has a question, you can feel free to ask it out loud or type it.
I'm actually curious, Catherine. Like, I saw you comment on LinkedIn yesterday about the meta moderation piece. I just wanted to get kind of your deep dive, having that experience, and actually with the porn and all this stuff. that you talked about. Like, what is your perspective on that?
So I am concerned that, taking the, changing the approach from, kind of the mea culpa, approach that Facebook has been taking to moderation is a little concerning, especially for groups that are specifically, on the margins. Because especially when you're using community notes, that kind of basically means the majority is going to rule, and that's like, you know, questionable. And but at the same time, I do think that, Facebook can't be the arbiters of, you know, truth. And I can see like that is going to be very difficult, and it's a very difficult thing to moderate. But obviously, with the timing and everything, I found it suspect. Matt Stoth has a lot of great thoughts on this. He has a great podcast on it. He just had an episode about it yesterday, called Safety is Sexy. So definitely check out the podcast. It's a great podcast in general from like the trust and safety field. But he specifically also talks about the Meta announcement. And so like I get like reasons of like why it needs, why they're saying about it. Obviously, I think it's all very much politically tinted, and I that they're going to go towards something that X is doing, and X is kind of like not doing well on the moderation is a problem. And so that's concerning. And I think that that's also another reason to, find your own communities that make you feel good, and avoiding the communities that don't. And so that might, it's actually I stopped using Twitter/X a while ago, for similar reasons. It was just like the type of content that was there. But I think that there's, questions, but we won't really know what it'll be like until it's there. I do think that, Facebook has had a lot of moderation issues of even just the really bad stuff, like, so if they can improve by focusing on just getting criminal activity off, that would be great. Because there are some, you know, some issues just in general with things that should be moderated by, moderation is always such a hard thing, but I do recommend Matt's podcast on, basically the whole trust and safety field, because it's a great listen.
Is there anything else that you're listening to or reading right now that you recommend that you are enjoying?
Yeah, so I'm on Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Um,
I
no,
could have, I should have, I walked right into it.
but also, so I just finished reading Atomic Habits. I know that it's been out a while. I purposely, though, I had wanted to read it a while ago while I was like writing my book, but then I started to get afraid. So I was reading a lot of nonfiction books at the time, and I was like, oh crap. A lot of these are very similar. And I was like, I have a feeling I'm going to have a lot of the same opinions as him. I just don't want to be persuaded. So I didn't read it till now, but it's very, very good. So I'm glad I finally read it. It's been on my list for a while. So that's a great one. Build for Tomorrow with Jason Pfeiffer is a great one. Um, I think what's the next one I'm reading? There is yeah, I've read a lot of books recently because I've been trying to read all of my author cohorts books. So it's, just been a lot of reading, and, that's my happy place. So it's good. In terms of listening though, I am also listening to Buffering the Vampire Slayer because they just did a rewatch podcast. So now it's a rewatch with spoilers this time. So yeah. So lots of dorky stuff, and then also, cool books. Disagree on the original movie. But yeah, thank you. And thank you everyone for coming and for celebrating the book with me. It's been fantastic writing it. Fantastic finally having it out and being able to hold it. And yeah, so thank you. And thank you for coming here today. Yay. All right.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Kat. Thanks
everyone.
for
Thank you,
sharing.
Kerri. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank
Thanks,
you. Thanks for sharing
Catherine.
everything. It was awesome.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks, everyone. Bye. Oh, review the book if you haven't.